Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm glad that you're all here. I'd like to just make a couple of quick introductions to our speakers who are here with us. And really, we're fortunate to have a multi-faith group representing Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And with us today is Reverend Cheri DiNovo, and I'll tell you about her for a second. Reverend DiNovo is minister at Trinity St. Paul's for Faith, Justice, and the Arts, and is an Order of Canada recipient. As an Ontario MPP, she introduced and passed more private member bills, including the Jewish Heritage Month bill, than anyone in Ontario's history, and more LGBTQ legislation than anyone also in Canadian history, which is just amazing. With us as well is Rabbi Flanzraich from Beth Shalom Synagogue, who is a well-respected community rabbi. He's also the past president of the Toronto Board of Rabbis. He's a member of Israel Bond's Rabbinic Cabinet. He's the incoming president of the Rabbinical Assembly of Toronto, the author of a Jewish book, I think it is. It's not written well here, but called A Small Still Voice. And he can be seen on television quite regularly, including on TVO's interfaith programming. And of course, we know that Rabbi is also very much involved in interfaith dialogue quite widely and speaks to many groups. And as well, we have with us today Imam Dr. Hamid Slimi. Imam Slimi is a community developer. He's a teacher and a spiritual leader who has been serving Muslims in Canada since 1997. He is currently a professor of Islamic Studies at the Canadian Centre for Deen Studies and UIN University in Indonesia. In addition to his traditional Islamic degrees, known as Ijaza, he holds 2 master's degrees with high honors from Morocco and the United States, and a PhD in Islamic law from the UK. He is an Imam, a resident scholar of a mosque in Mississauga called Sayyida Khadija, and he's been there since 2009. He's also the former chairman of the Canadian Council of Imams, so a very influential panel we have here with us today, who's very well accomplished. I know each one of our panelists individually, and I can tell you that they're just marvelous human beings. So thank you very much for joining me for this short discussion today. So as mentioned, now that we've finished the introduction, so as mentioned, we at the Wiesenthal Center were specifically interested as part of our own interfaith dialogue, and in hope of building a broad Canadian tent and always reaching out and communicating with various clergy and leaders. We wanted to touch base on the most important issue of our day today. It's all over the news, and you can't escape it in your daily life. It's the COVID-19 situation, and we wanted to know how it's affecting each and every community across the landscape. So I guess my first question to the panelists, and maybe we'll start with the Imam. How is COVID-19 affecting your community specifically?
Oh, okay. Hello, everyone. Peace be with you. Shalom. Salam alaikum. Thank you for having us. Very thoughtful to gather us in these times. COVID-19 is an unprecedented experience, unexpected. And it has, of course, affected us. It has frozen us in a certain way, physically, but thanks to the technology that we're using now, we're able to communicate. However, I think it has made us appreciate the good things we had. Sometimes I use the word divine adjustment. We're getting adjusted, family-wise, time-wise, priorities-wise. So we're still in the dream. We haven't woken up yet. Then we can answer that question. I think our question now is very relative to the moment, but I think we're still in the dream. Once the dream is over and then we wake up, then we will look and see how, the extent of the impact. But as a clergy, as a religious leader of my community, because the co-panelists are in the same, of course, task to cater spiritually for your community, is quite very challenging to cater to community, number one, at a distance, remotely, by phone, less, interaction. But more importantly, there is the mental health factor. There is the loneliness. And I'm sure, as in other communities, we have a significant number of baby boomers and, elderly people. I had my first funeral last Wednesday. It was quite touching. And we had to air it online on Facebook and YouTube, because the community, and especially a person who is very influential, very charitable person, a philanthropist, and who died. And it just happened to be my first COVID-19. Most of the people have relatives in the US or some other places, but now we're seeing that. So not to make it long, I think it's very difficult to answer your question, because we're still in the dream, still assessing what's going on. And we haven't reached the peak, or probably we're in the peak. But the main thing for my mission or my task is to cater for my community spiritually, to be there to support the families. I was, one thing which is very peculiar to this, we expected a lot of mental health when it comes to the youth. So far, we haven't seen a major crisis, but it's affecting marriages. It's a social change now that men and women work in the same place with their children. Today, I'm at home now. That's why I'm using this one here, because I don't want, the kids are here. My youngest one is 11, but still, I told him and he promised me he's going to go to the library in the basement. So just, this is the reality, to work and do but I go to the office for the online services and this. Yeah.
So and that's very interesting, and I'm sure very similar to some of the other experiences. And I wanted to ask Cheri DiNovo, Reverend, if you're experiencing the same sentiments, and on building on that notion, is your community doing any relief work?
Well, for starters, our community has been affected. We have one congregant whose daughter, in her 20s, has just come off intubation and is now, her kidneys are very badly affected, still in ICU. So that's as direct as it's been. We have had a number of congregants who have relatives who've had COVID but are recovering from it, thank God. What we've been doing, which we've continued, our building is shut down. We have to do that. We have almost 10,000 people a month that go through that building. So we just had to make an executive call and say, other than, building staff that have to go in there to clean and look after the place, everybody else stays away. So we've been conducting services online for a while now. And every day I send out prayers online as well. But I have all our meetings on Zoom. So church meetings that we're having. What we've been doing is really pastoral care is what I would say. We have a lot of seniors in long-term care and retirement homes. They're most at risk right now. So, for example, yesterday after services, I phoned through our list to all of them. They're all, of course, as we all are, in lockdown, but they particularly, and of course, many of them just have a room. So it's very, very difficult. Rumors go all over the place. There is a long-term care home. We don't actually have anyone in it, but a block from my house now, Elm Grove Living Center, that I just learned has had 12 deaths and over 80 cases in a residential facility that only has 125 residents and equal numbers or more of staff. So, this is really showing, to me, what it's showing is our yesterday in our scriptural passages, it was talking about woundedness. It's showing the wounds in our communities. It's showing the wounds in the way we handle social services. This was a tragedy that one could have seen in the making in long-term care. Many people work in that, PSWs and others, overworked, underpaid, not enough staff. So again, this I lay at government's feet in a sense, but certainly I hope that once we're through this pandemic, that we get a kind of reboot, to use a computer term, a reboot on the way that we do government and the way that we look after people. I also live in an area where there are a number of homeless out on Queen Street. How can they keep social distancing if they live in a shelter? Impossible. So again, it shows us that we should be way more active on the housing file. Other cities have housed homeless in hotels, for example. So again, I've spent a lot of time kind of calling on and calling up former colleagues and saying, what are you, this has to be repaired. Maybe not in the short term, but certainly in the long term, to prevent this from happening again. So I guess what you'd say is we're involved in a kind of social justice sense, pretty broadly. And we're involved in a pastoral care sense to all of our congregants and people they know. So that takes a lot of time. In fact, I'm sure I'm speaking for the others on this panel and saying that I'm working from home, but I'm putting in long hours, and I'm sure we all feel the same. And there's just a sense of frustration, of course, when you're in leadership. If you want to be there, we've had several deaths, and they've postponed their memorials. They're having just a simple graveside service, and they postpone. So, when I get back to work, when we all get back to work, I'm going to have nonstop, sadly, nonstop celebrations of life, to put a happy spin on it, for a number of our congregants. And we have a bunch of weddings coming up. Will we, end this in time for them? I don't know. But again, if they are postponed, which I suspect some of them will be, we'll find ourselves very, very, very busy once we get back into that building.
No doubt. It's tough times, and really you laid that out very, very nicely in terms of the demands that must be on you and your fellow clergy here. Rabbi Aaron, I wanted to ask you maybe a different question, and I don't know, how you might address it, and the others will, and you can certainly also build on what was being said. Do you have congregants with you that really want to try to understand the meaning of this all, in the real big religious picture point of view? And I'm sure some of the others as well. What is the meaning of this? Especially we've just passed Passover, we also Easter. The plagues. What is the meaning of this?
It's a great question, Avi. It's also an important question. And as I often try to do with my congregants, is I try to direct them in the most important way for Jews, and that is we ask a question on a question. And I try to direct them to understand that in the face of this challenge, which is a societal challenge, in many ways builds on lots of setbacks and problems we have in our own lives. And so people come to me asking for advice, trying to figure out why they have challenges the way that they do. Why do they have setbacks the way that they do? And fundamentally, I'm reminded of this beautiful but chilling passage in Primo Levi's book, Ecce Homo, Is This a Man? Mm-hmm. And during his time in Auschwitz, there was someone being beaten, and he was thirsting to a degree he had never tasted thirst before. And he thought that as the person was being beaten, that he could grab an icicle off of a building and suck on it. And another German guard came over and knocked the icicle out of his hand. And Primo Levi turns to him and says, "Why?" And the German guard says to him, "Here, there is no why." To which the other Holocaust survivor and great social psychologist Viktor Frankl once said, "The point in life is not to ask why. The point of life is to ask what now." And so really, to echo what my colleagues have beautifully framed, is there are many challenges that we're facing. People are facing deep economic challenges. People are facing psychological challenges. People are facing familial challenges, both medically and also like Hamid Slimi, Imam Slimi, my dear friend, said, the other day I had a funeral and we all had to wear masks. So only 10 people are allowed there, including me. And I walked away and I realized how difficult it is to talk to people in these moments if they can't see my face.
Yeah.
So as we were walking off of the cemetery, the bereaved husband turned to me and said, Rabbi, we're going to stand 6 feet apart, but I want you to take your mask off and I'm going to take mine off because I want to see your face. So the answer is, why? Why? There's lots of reasons to why this happened. But really our answer has to be, Avi, what do we do now? And our answer as a community is, and you know this very well, we draw close.
Thank you. That's a very meaningful answer, a beautiful answer, and you're right. And that question really plays out, at least in my mind, on a daily basis. I'm wondering if, since our time is limited, we can talk about the why and maybe hand it back to Imam Slimi. And we're about to commemorate in the Jewish community, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, where we, again, humanity suffered that tragedy, and since then we know that there have been many other tragedies. How do we address these things in this climate?
Well, speaking of Holocaust and all the pains that humanity has suffered over, human history, when we go through such trials, such as the pandemic, especially for our generation, and we have to admit that we had it easy. I mean, no matter what, we can't complain. I'm a little bit over 50 years old now, and I look back, we didn't have it difficult. Those who grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s, we look back, we look even deeper. And I used to talk to my grandfather. He was telling me about the First World War and Second World War. And my father can't recall so much about the Second World War. But when you have people telling you the stories, and then now you can relate what it means to be, in a place. A lot of people think that they're in prison now because they can't go out, freedom. So then when it's taken to even a larger extent where you're not even free to express yourself, you're not free to practice your religion or wear your religious, symbols. So people, I think, in these times will appreciate more and understand. Maybe it's a good time to understand things like the Holocaust and the suffering, because we're a generation that has been pampered very well. We had a lot of blessings and goodies. We ate a lot of sugar and sweets, a lot of cheesecake and ice cream. We don't know what pain is. And when we read about, Moses and his people and Jesus and Muhammad and all these beautiful people, it was a lot of suffering and sacrifices. I don't think people in history, like their saying goes, tough times make great people, and great people make easy times, and easy times make, small people. It's a circle. Before I close, like the Reverend mentioned, basically it brought the best of our people. Honestly, there are some, the shooting yesterday is very sad, and our hearts go to the victims. We still didn't. I haven't digested yet. I had a very busy day with the food collection. We do like a drive-through food drop-off for Ramadan to distribute to food banks and poor people, and I was busy. But then my wife told me, "Have you heard of the shooting?" So, and I still am trying to digest. This is the worst in Canadian history. Yeah. We should let these bad things show, because a lot of good things are happening. And these bad times really show the best of us. Food, donations online. People are doing, in spite, as you said, economical difficulties, in spite of all of this, people are just prioritizing. I think this is what I want to say. I don't think we're going to go back to the normal we're used to. I think life is going to change, and we're going to be witnesses for history. We're at a very, shifting point. I hope that we shift towards the right direction.
Thank you, Imam. Well said. And you're right. We should as well mention the shooting that took place yesterday in Nova Scotia, how horrific that event is. And, bless the policewoman who was killed in the line of duty. It's just terrible. So thank you very much for mentioning that. Reverend DiNovo, do you have any thoughts on Yom HaShoah?
Of course, I used to be the designated speaker, for our party at Queen's Park when we would commemorate this day, and grew up on Bedford Road, which was not Shishi back then, which my parents ran a rooming house, and my friends who lived around Markham Street and on Spadina were all Jewish. That was my era in this city. So it has always been a part of my life. And I think as non-Jews, the first thing we have to say is mea culpa, especially as Canadians, lest we forget that we have to remember. It's so critical that we remember every year that this happened, because there is a rise in anti-Semitism around the world. We know this for a fact. And so vigilance is called for, and also a really searching look at, first of all, in Christianity, the anti-Semitism that was practiced, and to be cognizant of that in our churches and in our scripture. I'm constantly shifting our scripture at this time of year. We're reading out of John. There's some problems with that book. So that, but also our history in Canada, we turned Jews away when they were looking for, a port to land in. This is part of our history as a country. It's part of our history as Canadians. We can't forget that either. So a really sort of searching look at what my own faith does or does not do. A really searching look at what's happening socially and politically around the world, and being ever vigilant about anti-Semitism, which is still so much with us, and as we know, is growing. So I think that's what we're called upon to do, very much so. That's what I would say. And of course, yes, the Imam is right as well. There, in any situation in history, we have been a fairly blessed generation in this country, in the sense that we've avoided, on the ground and much happening until perhaps now. But I grew up with the stories of my parents. I'm sure we all did, of the 30s, of the wars, of times that weren't so good. And I think it's even more incumbent upon us, because we have been privileged. We do enjoy some privilege. We do enjoy some safety. We do enjoy some freedom, to really look out for those who still are at risk. I mean, that's the other message I would say. There are still many at risk. And certainly anti-Semitism is a part of our reality. So to sit in prayer and to also sit in self-reflection.
Thank you. Self-reflection. That's very well put for our times. And I know I've been spending a lot of time doing that. Rabbi Flanzraich, our last speaker for this session, on building on Yom HaShoah and the concept as well of perhaps tikkun olam and humanity. What are your thoughts on that?
We all stand on the shoulders of giants, and in this context, and I want to draw on the words of a giant when it comes to Holocaust studies and studies of humanity, and that's none other than Elie Wiesel. And Elie Wiesel once beautifully coined, that once you bear witness to something, you become a witness. And the deeper idea held within this beautiful thought is that the exercise in remembering on Yom HaShoah the story and the history of the Holocaust is not simply to remember, because the great activity of Jewish memory is not simply to remember things that have happened. The historian Yosef Yerushalmi once said that Jews remember things not to recall events, but to create emotion. And so we remember things because of how they can shape us as human beings going forward. And so taking into account what my dear friends and my colleagues have just said, we recall the suffering of the Holocaust and the enormous human price that it took. I lost family in the Shoah, as many, many millions of people did. And we do this because it inspires us to be sensitive to the suffering of others. In other words, we remember so that it shall never happen again. And in the midst of this terrible pandemic, our hearts must be open to the suffering of others. And I pray that it will be.
Thank you for those very meaningful words. All of your words have been incredibly meaningful today, and I know it's just a short snapshot because there's so much more, but I know also that your communities demand so much of you. Your congregants and your schedules are so full. The work that you are all doing in your respective communities, but also I have to say in the bigger community, because you're all serving really our wonderful country, is really a blessing. And you know, we've asked you all because you're all spectacular leaders who really have an open mind, an open heart, and a welcoming of humanity. And so I want to thank you again for joining us here, for you know, sharing some of your wisdom. I know there's much more, and wishing you a lot of luck, good health and safety at this time. So thank you again, and God bless you.
Thank you, Al.
Thank you.